Labour Party should be thoroughly ashamed of, and they should be thoroughly ashamed of their London Mayor.
Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and can I also join my colleagues in thanking the member for Don Valley in the way that he has presented these petitions today. And I totally agree with every single thing that has been said by my Conservative colleagues throughout the course of this debate so far, and I don't want to be too repetitive. I do want to re-emphasise some really important points, not least of which that this ULEZ expansion was not in the Mayor of London's manifesto, that the consultation showed overwhelming opposition to it, and by his own integrated impact assessment will do absolutely nothing to tackle air quality. If the Mayor really wanted... Gladly.
I thank you for the honourable member for giving way. Why do you think in 2020 Nicky Aiken, the Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party and the MP for the Cities of London and Westminster, said, "I fully support the Mayor's ultra-low emission zone and its planned extension. The majority of car journeys in the two cities are not made up of local people. They are travelling through, ruining our air quality." How can you say the Conservative Party does not support you?
Well, I'm very happy to help the honourable lady from the Labour Party figure out what actually London looks like in terms of its geography, because that comes from the two cities, which is inner London, and the Conservative Party did support the inner London low emission zone. It does not support the greater London low emission zone, as in my constituency.
She's the chair of your party. Sorry, I apologise.
Now, I have long been opposed. I will gladly give way to my honourable friend.
Would my honourable friend acknowledge that the inner London ultra-low emission zone is contained within the congestion charging zone, which has a massive surplus of public transport alternatives and had demonstrably worse and less clean air than outer London, which is why my honourable friend, the member for Cities of London and Westminster, was in favour of it while she was leader of Westminster City Council, why it was supported when it was initially consulted on under the mayorship of Boris Johnson by the GLA Conservative group. But outer London is completely different, does not suffer from the bad air and does not have the public transport alternatives. And that might help the honourable lady in the opposition to understand why there is a very big difference between the inner London ultra-low emission zone and the outer London one proposed by the Mayor.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention, and characteristically as a former member of the London Assembly, he's absolutely right. And indeed, I imagine that our honourable friend, the member for the Cities of London and Westminster, may have been less supportive at the time had she known that the Mayor only a few years later would be looking to cut the historic number 11 bus route out of central London in her constituency as well. Now, since... I'll gladly give way.
Sorry to intervene on the honourable member. I just thought it would be worth just reflecting on the quote given by the opposition front bench. Back in 2020, there was no proposal from the Mayor of London to expand ULEZ to the Greater London boundary. So whatever the honourable lady, the honourable member, who is not here, and I'm sure the opposition front bench let her know that there should be mentioned in Westminster Hall before making a point. I'm sure they certainly did that. But whatever she was saying in 2020 wasn't supportive of whatever Mayor Carnes put forwards. It wasn't anything about what's being debated today, because that wasn't the proposal of ULEZ at the time by Mayor Carnes, which is entirely the point, largely, of some of the petitioners who got in touch about today's debate.
We're not under any real-time pressure, but can I remind right honourable and honourable members that interventions should be shortened to the point. They're gradually getting longer and longer. Elliot Coburn.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. I'll just quickly move on then and say that the Minister is absolutely right. Now, just like other colleagues, I've seen firsthand in my postbag the local organic opposition to ULEZ continue to grow, not just from the petition that I have been running and is continuing to grow by hundreds of signatures every week, but by the very real stories that we are receiving from our constituents about how expansion of the ultra-low emission zone will impact them. And in Carshalton and Wallington alone, there is estimated 30% of all vehicles in my constituency, which translates roughly as about 30,000 cars, will not be deemed compliant if the expansion goes ahead. That's 30,000 vehicles. And how many people stand to be impacted by that? How many families? How many small businesses? How many pensioners? How many charities? These are real concerns voiced by real people. And yet, how are they portrayed? How are they dealt with? The Mayor of London, seemingly deaf to these concerns, labels them wackos, nut jobs, and conspiracy theories, then that's when he's not too busy trying to sell his book or going around the world advertising marijuana farms. But where do my constituents go for help? Where do my constituents look for help? The Mayor's not helping them. The Conservatives are the only party opposing it. But what about their local council? Well, behind all the latest smoke and mirrors there is the inescapable fact that the Liberal Democrats have been consistently pro-ULEZ all the time. This dates back all the way to 2020, when it was actually a Lib Dem Assembly member who berated the Mayor for not introducing a whole London ultra-low emission zone. Then now, closer to home, the Lib Dem Assembly member has welcomed ULEZ expansion as right and necessary, and certain Lib Dem councillors have been voicing their support for ULEZ expansion to our roads for years. One of them went so far to boldly state on social media, yes, we are in favour of ULEZ. They voted down a motion called by the Conservative group on Sutton Council to call on the Mayor to drop it. And even now, even when they're trying to claw back some kind of credibility, they can still only go as far as to say that we want a delay. Well, a delay isn't good enough. The only thing that is acceptable to do with ULEZ is scrap it. And it doesn't surprise me, Mr. Stringer, that looking at the benches opposite, it's not only that the Labour Party that aren't here, but the Lib Dems aren't here either. But it is incredibly heartening to see Conservative colleagues working together across London and outside of it. And I do congratulate the 5 Conservative-run councils that have brought forward this. But hearing the warning on sub judice, I won't go any further than that. Now, we are not only dealing with constituents here who are frustrated and worried to their wits' end, but there is also other groups that I fear have been left out of this conversation as well, one of which is charities. Because for many of these charities, to buy a new ULEZ-compliant vehicle would be tantamount to financial ruin. And I believe, Mr. Stringer, that this speaks volumes in the weaknesses identified in this heavy-handed approach. Tens of thousands of Londoners, including many in Carshalton and Wallington, will see no help from the Mayor of London's scrappage scheme. And as we have already heard, even those who do qualify, it is not nearly enough. And many of us on this side of the House have long been arguing for a broader, more holistic approach rather than the current scheme that is in place. And this goes back to the crux of the issue. The Mayor of London seeks to punish people for being unable to afford to upgrade their vehicle, instead of encouraging people to live a greener lifestyle. Instead of the millions of pounds spent on ULEZ enforcement cameras, he could have invested this to, for example, expand London's green bus fleet, improve the connectivity of outer London boroughs, beefed up the scrappage scheme, fix the massive failures in his solar panel rollout, bring back the boiler scrappage scheme that the last Mayor had in place. And if you take Carshalton and Wallington as an example, Mr. Stringer, like my honourable friend for Orpington, we have a terrible public transport accessibility rating for a London borough of just 2. We do not have the tram, we do not have the London Overground, we do not have the tube. We have bus networks and a limited number of national rail networks. And as my honourable friend for Orpington says, they are often unreliable. The expansion of the tram to Sutton was scrapped by this Mayor, and yet has the audacity to say that he will somehow improve the public transport network, which in our case is a Superloop bus, Mr. Stringer, which already exists and has a limited number of stops. So how can my constituents get to work, visit friends and families, and go about their daily lives if they can't afford the £12.50 daily charge and there isn't sufficient public transport network in place? The short answer is they won't. And rather than encouraging people through proactive means, he's decided to go with a heavy-handed approach of slapping hard-working Londoners, of the least well-off in our communities, with an arbitrary fee just to leave their driveways. This is not the way to do it, Mr. Stringer, so I urge the government to look at the petitioner's asks again, because we cannot allow this ULEZ expansion to go ahead.
Thank you very much.